Hi, this is Katie Jarvis with Managing the Mess. In this video, we're going to be talking all about clay, how to set this up for your students, how to teach them to be successful with the clay, what tools I recommend using, and how to clean up this messy but extremely fun activity. When you're working with clay with students, a big thing you need to think about is the clay dust. So I highly recommend covering your tables either with roll paper, which is what I typically do, and tape that down so it's not moving when students are manipulating the clay. I've also used newsprint or newspaper, or even those plastic tablecloths from like the Dollar Tree or the party store, or rolls of the plastic tablecloth. Putting that down helps to protect your surface, and you can simply roll them up when students are finished and dispose of them so all of that clay dust is easy to clean up. If I'm doing clay with my kindergarten or first grade students, I start them out with Play-Doh. This is actually Crayola dough, and I would buy a class pack of these and then use my clay cutter tool, which is the wire with two little pieces of wood as handles on the side. I would cut through that Play-Doh and make it into little sections for each student. Storing these in a Ziploc bag, this will last me all through my clay season, and my kindergarten and first grade students can use this over and over. We would use this Play-Doh to practice making a pinch pot before we did this with the real clay. So it gives them a little bit of experience and it gives them a little bit of practice. When I'm cutting the clay, I do not do this when students are in the room, but I prepare this ahead of time. For me, that's just good classroom management, that those things are already taken care of. And when the students are there, we can focus our time on making, and I can focus my attention on the students. If I am cutting pieces of clay, I am using this wire cutting tool for the clay. If I'm doing pinch pots, I'm cutting the clay into squares. Now, the clay that I order is kiln-fired clay, and it comes in these 25-pound bags. Approximately 1 pound of clay per student is what you need to prepare for, approximately. If you're making something a little bit bigger, you might need to adjust things. But I cut them into squares if I'm making a pinch pot. If I'm making something where we're going to be rolling out coils, I will cut the clay into long rectangular pieces. It reminds me, I guess, of a fish stick. I find this is easy. Then students can take out the rectangle, squeeze it into a hot dog shape, and then begin rolling it. We're not going from a square to trying to get something into that coil shape. We've already got a little bit of a head start, and it helps students to feel successful and be able to complete their projects within one class period. I do have hour-long classes, and in most of my grade levels, I will do clay all within one day. When I get into my 5th and 6th grade classes, that's when we're working on something for multiple days. Keep listening to the video because I'll get to this at the end, how I store the clay so that I can be able to use things for next week. Now, if I'm cutting slabs, I do not use this wire cutter, but rather I use this slab cutting tool. So you would take this and you would stand up and press this down into your block of clay, and it cuts you thin, even slabs to use with students. So if I was storing this, what I like to do is use a Rubbermaid tote, because these are a little bit bigger, and between each slab, I put one of my clay mats. Now, my clay mats are just little Dollar Tree cutting boards, and this keeps them from sticking together, and they are ready for students then when they arrive in art. I would stack all of these up into my container and add some wet paper towels so that there is a lot of moisture in there. This could last in here for several weeks before I would need to re-wet those paper towels. If I'm cutting my clay blocks into squares or the rectangles, I like to store them in these little dish pans. You can find these at Walmart or the Dollar Tree pretty affordably. And I will stack them up in there, do the wet paper towel trick again, and I would put this in a school trash bag and then tie it off at the end. So these are two ways, like either the Rubbermaid tote or the dish pan, that I can save things and have them ready and prepped ahead of time to use with my students when we're doing clay. Another thing I would also prepare before students arrive is having their names set up so it's easy to put their names onto their projects. So for my fourth graders, they build a coil bowl inside of a styrofoam bowl. So I'd have their name tag labels already on the bowls before they arrive. I have a kindergarten project where they make a slab house, and similarly, I put a name tag label on the back of a styrofoam tray or a plate so that students can put their artwork there when they're done. Once these projects firm up a little bit, I would scratch their name, the year, parents love that, and a little code for their teacher into the back of the clay. But that helps it to be marked so I know whose is whose. Another strategy that I like to use, especially if I don't have an IA in my class with me, is that I will put pieces of paper out onto carts and have the students' names already in a little section on the paper. Students, as they finish doing their coil pot or their pinch pot, would simply set their artwork right on top of their name. And then later, when I'm able to, I will scratch names into the projects as well. In preparing my lessons, I take photos of each step of the clay process. I like to put these in laminated sheets that I'll have distributed for students at their tables so that when I'm walking around to help students, I can refer to what step they are on. This particular one also has an option of different types of coils. I think I found this on Teachers Pay Teachers, but it gives students a reference so that they feel more successful in knowing what some of the options are. For younger students that are completing pinch pots, I like to give them a reference guide like this that shows them what our goal is and some mistakes that we are trying to avoid. We want our project to be strong. We don't want it to fall apart. We also want their project to dry at the same rate as their classmates. So guiding them to this one that you see here is very important. For some of my projects, I have students cut out different shapes into slabs of clay. So I would do that with poster board. This is for my kindergarten slab houses. So I provide this shape and then students would cut around this when they begin, and I would complete this before students arrive. First, I'm going to share a tool that I only use. I do not let my students use. It is a needle tool, which is a wooden handle with a little metal needle point there at the end. I use this for scratching names into the bottom of the clay projects. I scratch the students' names in along with the year and a code for their teacher. I do this because I have to be able to read their names to return it to them so that they can glaze their project the following week. I also have to be able to read their name so that I can return it to them when the project is finished and I can grade it. So this cuts down on my stress that it's my handwriting. I know the teacher's name is on there as well, so I'm not sorting through things and having missing clay projects. Next, I'm going to share the tools that I use with my students, the first of which is plastic forks. So you could also use a plastic comb from the Dollar Tree in place of this. I use these plastic forks to score the clay. So how I explain this to students is, if you pushed two pieces of clay together, maybe you have a gargoyle and you're attaching some eyeballs and you push those eyeballs on there, it will stay. When the clay dries, if someone bumps it or even the wind blows a little bit, the clay is going to become detached. You really need to create something where the two pieces of clay are going to lock together. So what I have them do is use the plastic fork or plastic comb and scratch each piece of clay, the piece that they have already created and the piece that they would like to connect to it. And when they push it together, it creates a seal. So this is a lot like how a Lego snaps together or Velcro. So that's an important tool and it's an important technique to teach your students that they need to scratch it to attach it. If they don't use this technique, when things dry, you're going to have pieces that fall off. You're going to have some really unhappy students. For my clay water cups, I use these really small, colorful containers, and I like it because it gives just a tiny amount of water to students. When students are doing clay, they really are just dipping a little finger in and then rubbing it on their project. So you don't want to give them large volumes of water. You're going to end up with really sloppy, wet projects. I have students, when they're filling this up, put the tiniest amount of water, as though maybe a mouse is getting a little drink, into this cup, and then pass one out to each corner of the table. So 2 students would be sharing 1 water cup. When I have a project where the students need to draw into the clay, I use old scratch art wooden stylus tools. So this is great for if students need to trace something or if they want to draw textures and details, or even using, the eraser side of it to press into clay to create a circle. Another tool that I use often is these clothespins. So these are really old-fashioned clothespins. The last time I got these, I had to purchase them from Amazon. And what I use this is a rectangular stamper. So in my kindergarten classes, they create a clay slab house, and we use this as a tool to press in the shingles of the roof. The next tool that we use a lot is these wooden little sticks. These are just clay tools that you would find in one of the art supply catalogs. We use this when we are sealing and attaching clay and when we're adding different textures and details. These are some loop tools. So there's like a little different loop on each end. Students would use this for carving into the clay to create different textures. This is a tool that I would use just primarily with my upper grade students and not with the youngers. I keep a collection of plastic knives. This is used for when we're cutting into slabs and cutting out different shapes of clay. And I keep a couple different buckets of extra supplies that can be used to create textures in clay. So this is a tool that was underneath some glue sticks that we had ordered. I would save things like marker lids, glue stick lids, the inside of tape, small cookie cutters. They do sell different kind of texture plates that you can use as well for when you're doing clay. I think I purchased this also from an art supply catalog, but I keep these on hand, and this one is just a bit mixed up so students can take what they need. Sometimes I'll put fun things in there like seashells also to add texture. When you're teaching your students about clay, you need to first teach them about the journey of clay. What is that process that the clay is going to take after they finish making? And first off, where did the clay come from? So you're going to teach them that clay comes from the ground. You're going to teach them where they would find it near a creek or a river, or if they would dig down really deep, maybe when a house is being built, to find a spot where there used to be water underground. There are some graphics that you can find online that show a mountain and it raining on the mountain. And as the water is going down the mountain, it's picking up little minerals and rocks along the way. So that's forming the clay, and that's why you would find the clay at the bottom of the mountain where there is a creek or a river. So that's a good illustration for students to understand how is this made and created. Then I would recommend finding a clay process chart or showing. There is a little clip on YouTube, and I will try to link it down below. It comes from a Crystal Productions DVD, and I believe it's called Dropping In, and the episode is called Ceramic Process, but it will walk students through an animated version of this. But I like to use a clay journey image that I found online. It was by Melinda Gram, I believe, and she shared it using Slideshare. I will link that down below in the description if that is still available. I do believe she is the original source on that, but it may be pulled from somewhere else. And I teach my students about what happens once we are done making that wet clay. So within a day or two after we make our clay, it begins to dry and it becomes leather hard. So I have them feel their shoes and explain that, how their shoe is a solid, but it can still move around. That's how the clay is at that point of being leather hard. The next part in the process, as she describes it, is the green wear. So this is when we use brown clay. This is when I notice that the color is changing in the clay. The color is getting lighter, and I know that all the water is drying up inside of the clay and that it's ready to be fired. So at that point, I would teach my students about the firing and that the project is going into the kiln. It's great if you can take a little video of what your kiln room or your kiln area looks like, or take some pictures so they know a little bit about that if they're not able to go and see that in your classroom. The next process step is that it becomes bisqueware. So once it comes out of the kiln, so the next time the students will see the clay, it's going to be hard. You could eat a biscuit off of it. So that's how I remember bisqueware. From there, students would do their glazing, and I have all the information about glazing in a separate video that you're going to watch next. After they glaze it, they're not ready to take it home yet. It has to be fired again. So in that second firing, you need to explain to students that the glazes are going to heat up, they're going to melt, and they're going to create a glass kind of covering that makes your product waterproof. So this is what makes it food safe if students want to use their art functionally and they want to eat or drink out of what you create. And then at the final step, so when they take it home, it would be called pottery or ceramics. They wouldn't take things home and say, look at my clay, because it's very different than that material that we began with. It is now permanent, it's now glazed, and it's much, much different. So that term needs to be taught to students, pottery and ceramics, because their project is changed at the end. Students love learning about this process, and I create an exit ticket where I pull the names out after I've taught them and have students pop the names back in order of what happens to the clay in the process and which name goes with which step. When I'm teaching students about clay, I'm breaking things down into the skills or the techniques that I want them to know. It's very helpful to have a chart where you have pictures of what the techniques look like. Having these laminated and available to students when they're working helps them to be successful and helps to build that vocabulary. When I'm teaching clay or really any other messy medium, I love to create videos for my students and show my own YouTube videos as my demonstrations. I've preferred this over live demonstrations because it is less mess for me. I'm not cleaning up clay off my desk week after week, using a document camera like I had done in the past. And I'm able to monitor students. I'm able to pause the video. I'm able to rewind and re-show things. Even if a student is absent, it's super easy to catch them up on what's going on with clay. So that's something that I recommend that you do as well, or seek out some of the wonderful resources that are online and videos that are already created on YouTube that show that step-by-step clay process. If you do have a student that's absent, what I like to do is I have them, they come in maybe when we are doing the glazing and they haven't yet made the clay project. I have them make the clay project while the rest of the class is glazing. And then I have a ketchup and pickle day that I do at the end of the quarter. So this is when students catch up on work that they did not complete, and then they get to pick and choose what they want to do. So that's when I'd catch up with glazing any of those projects that didn't get glazed throughout that quarter and catch up and clean out that kiln room. If I'm storing student artwork to work on the following week, what I have students do is wet paper towels at the sink, maybe 2 or 3 paper towels, and use this as a blanket on top of their clay project. I teach them how to hold it on their hands while a neighbor opens up a Ziploc bag for them, keeping their project flat and sliding it in, and then setting it down on the table. Once it's safely on the table, I have them zip their bags closed, going back underneath and carefully keeping, again, their hand flat and sliding this into a Dollar Tree dishpan bin. Now, I will label both the bag with the student's name ahead of time. I use name tag labels. I have all about this in my top 10 time-saving teacher tips video, so check that out if you haven't learned about my labels. And I would label 2 students' names on the outside of the bin. I'd be able to store 2 clay projects in here. These bins, I don't have lots of room to store in my classroom, but what I do is I put them up above my cabinets, and I will even create a pyramid of them if needed, so they are out of reach from other students' hands and they are ready the next time I need them. For the clay cleanup, I'm having my students sort and return all of my clay tools. I have them help me roll up the paper that I have on the tables and dispose of that. If there's any clay on the floor or on our chairs, I have students use baby wipes to help to remove that dust. And then last, I have students wash their hands. After students leave, I would label their artwork if that still needed to be done. And when I had time, I would wash those clay mats in the sink, and then I just put them right on my drying rack to dry, and that way they're clean and ready for my next class. I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video.